not limited to English. Though now, because and we don't talk about literature only. We don't talk about English literature only. We don't talk about literature only. We talk about other things as well. We might talk about culture. We might talk about psychology, philosophy, history, sociology, anthropology. So many other branches of study kind of mingle with the study of English language and literature. Therefore, I would say that because our domain is so vast, a knowledge of linguistics would be of great help to us. And linguistics also tends to overlap a bit into other domains. So it's a science, and other aspects of literature, like as I said, generally arts and humanities do not fall under the division of science. Though psychology sometimes kind of is considered to be to fall under humanities, but it is very scientific. But philosophy, history, political science, languages, etc., fall in the domain of humanities, which is different from science. I'm not saying it is not logical, but that science is slightly different. So linguistics is a science which studies the origin, organization, nature, and development of language descriptively, historically, comparatively, and explicitly, formulating the general rules related to language. Well, that is just for your information. അപ്പോൾ ലിംഗ്വിസ്റ്റിക്സ് എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് അതിന് മലയാളത്തിൽ നമുക്ക് എന്ത് പറയാം, ഭാഷാ പഠനം എന്നൊക്കെ വേണമെങ്കിൽ പറയാം. അതത്ര കംപ്ലീറ്റ് ആയിട്ടുള്ള ടേം അല്ല. അപ്പം എല്ലാ ഭാഷകളും എങ്ങനെയാണ് ഭാഷ ഉണ്ടാകുന്നത്, മനുഷ്യന്റെ ഭാഷയുടെ പ്രത്യേകതകൾ എന്തൊക്കെയാണ്, ഇതൊക്കെയാണ് നമ്മൾ ലിംഗ്വിസ്റ്റിക്സിനകത്ത് നോക്കുന്നത്. പ്രത്യേകിച്ചും അത് ഇംഗ്ലീഷ് ലാംഗ്വേജിനെ ചുറ്റിപ്പറ്റിയിട്ടാണ് നമ്മൾ കൂടുതലും നോക്കുന്നത്, ഇംഗ്ലീഷ് ഭാഷയുടെ ലോജിക്കും കാര്യങ്ങളും. അപ്പോൾ ഒരു ശാസ്ത്രീയ ഭാഷകളെ കുറിച്ചുള്ള ഒരു ശാസ്ത്രീയമായ പഠനമാണ് ലിംഗ്വിസ്റ്റിക്സ് എന്ന് നമുക്ക് വേണമെങ്കിൽ വ്യാഖ്യാനിക്കാം. ചാറ്റ് ബോക്സിൽ ഒരു ചോദ്യം വന്നത്, ഈ ക്ലാസ് അറ്റൻഡ് ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റാത്തവർക്ക് എന്തെങ്കിലും രീതിയിൽ ഉപയോഗപ്പെടുത്താൻ പറ്റും. രണ്ട് മൂന്ന് കാര്യങ്ങളുണ്ട്. അതാണ് ഞാൻ പറഞ്ഞത്. മിക്കവാറും നമ്മുടെ ക്ലാസ്സുകളെല്ലാം ഓൾറെഡി അതിന്റെ വീഡിയോകൾ ഉണ്ട്. അത് പിന്നെ നമ്മൾ ലൈവായിട്ടൊരു ക്ലാസ്സിന്റെ ഒരു ഡൈനാമിക്സിൽ നിന്നും അത് വ്യത്യാസമായിരിക്കും, എങ്കിലും നിങ്ങൾക്ക് അത്യാവശ്യം അത് ഉപയോഗിക്കാം. പിന്നെ വേറൊരു കാര്യം, ഞാൻ എടുക്കുന്ന ക്ലാസ്സുകൾ ഞാൻ റെക്കോർഡ് ചെയ്തിട്ട് എഡിറ്റ് ചെയ്ത് നിങ്ങൾക്ക് അവൈലബിൾ ആക്കുകയും ചെയ്യാം. അതുകൊണ്ട് പരമാവധി സപ്പോർട്ട് നമ്മുടെ ഭാഗത്തു നിന്ന് ഉണ്ടാവും. ഓക്കെ, ദാറ്റ് ഇസ് linguistics. Yeah. Modern linguistics is referred to as a science. So it is a science. When you say that linguistics is a science, then it would definitely have a set of features which make it scientific. What are they? We are looking at the scientific aspects. We are trying to kind of define what a science is and what happens in a scientific study of something. So here it is a scientific approach to languages, and what are the features that make linguistics a science. So observation. A scientist observes a series of phenomena in everyday life, collects data impartially. Impartially is an important word. Classifies them, and then you come out with some general principles. That is what happens in science. You observe things, then you collect data, and then come to certain assumptions based on that. So that is what happens in physics, in life sciences, etc. We do that all the time. And then, based on the information they have, through a process of induction, they come to general statements governing the phenomena observed. That is the next thing that happens. You observe facts, you put these facts together, you analyze them, you study them very closely, and you draw inferences. You come to certain general statements about what happens. So that is where we come across two words. One is inductive, and deduction and deductive. So inductive and deductive are two ways in which we perceive reality. Inductive and deductive are two different ways in which we perceive reality or we understand the world. ലോകത്തെ നമ്മൾ അറിയുന്നതിന് cognitive processes involved ആണ്. In the brain, cognitive processes are involved. Cognition means understanding, trying to understand external reality. External reality is very deceptive, and you need to apply your mind very cautiously and go about it using your sense of reason, analytical powers, logical reasoning, critical thinking, etc., and study it and come to conclusions. So your reasoning, the way your cognitive processes work, can be in two ways: inductive and deductive. So this is important because generally for any study, a knowledge of what inductive and deductive reasoning is will help you. Let us look at that in another presentation. I have prepared a brief one. We are going to look at what inductive and deductive reasoning are. Here you have a picture, and because we live in this part of the world where there are plenty of trees, and we do not live in a Sahara desert, or we do not live in an arid place like Rajasthan, or maybe a desert kind of place like Utah in America, or a highly snowy place like Siberia. Okay, from our experience, when we look at this picture, you have an idea of what it is. You are looking at this forest from above. But based on our existing knowledge, maybe we haven't been to this particular forest. Maybe we do not know what exactly the trees are, but we have a general idea about forests. And we kind of look at this picture with that idea in mind. So we are looking at the top, and then we try to imagine how it will be downwards. So we are processing from above downwards. So this is what is called deductive reasoning. You're drawing a conclusion first. You are drawing a conclusion that this is a forest. And then if you want to study it more, you will kind of think and study more and come to the basic things, like this is an evergreen forest, or this is a deciduous forest, and this is this particular season, and there's a river flowing among the trees, etc. All those details will come later. So it's deductive. This is deductive reasoning made very, very simple. Do not think that it is as simple as this. But in our general understanding of the world, this is how we do. Whenever we get a bit of information, we apply our existing knowledge on it and then have an overall understanding. But when you come across something you have no information at all, a totally new thing, then this will not work. Because you have no idea what it is. Then you might need another kind of study where we move from bottom upwards. We look at the basic kind of information and then collect all the information you need, and then you come to a conclusion. That is top. This is top down, and that is bottom up yeah, reality. For example, you might need to go down and look at the grass and the undergrowth, the foliage here, and the kinds of plants that grow here, the kind of rocks that are there, the vines that are there, and then you go upwards and you finally come to have a more what shall we say, very comprehensive idea of the forest. So that is, you start with the basic data and then come to the conclusion. This is called inductive reasoning using bottom up logic. So this is bottom up logic or inductive reasoning. This is what we generally say happens in science. In science, there are no inferences drawn without basic data. So you look at what happens, precisely observe the root system, observe the rocks underneath, all those things, and then come to a final conclusion, which will have no problem about that. That final conclusion will be very solid and it will be based on evidence. So this is inductive reasoning, which we say happens constantly in science. So to look at this using two other images in deductive reasoning or top down, we look at the top. That's why I showed you the picture of the forest so that you have this visual image of looking at the top. Maybe you look at a city from the top in from a helicopter or a drone, and you have and then you imagine what happens. You have a total idea of it. Okay, that is you draw the conclusion first that this is a city or the city has a particular kind of condition. Maybe there's a curfew in the city, and looking at it from above, using a drone image, you come to the conclusion based on your pre-existing knowledge, and then maybe you work down to the other things. So this is deductive reasoning. In our life, this happens most of the time. In life, we kind of look at things and immediately form an idea and then go over. But this idea may not be totally right. So deductive reasoning is good. We use that a lot in life, but it may not be very accurate all the time. But this is something we do all the time, which is necessary too. When you come across a new text, when you come across a new discourse, you come across a new paragraph or a book, you read it with a lot of deductive reasoning involved because you do not go into all the minute details, but you form conclusions. You from the first 3 4 5 lines, you assume that this is a story about a young man who is rather poor but who seems to be in love with a rich woman, etc., etc. And because you have already pre-existing knowledge, which is called schema, you kind of understand things, but your understanding will not be absolutely complete because you need to do a lot of research to make that complete. So deductive reasoning or top-down reasoning is something that happens to you all the time. But in a scientific study, even as, for example, I am a scholar who is doing research on the dialects in Trivandrum. I have some idea about the dialects in Trivandrum, but when I do a scientific study, I will totally do an inductive kind of study. I make observations, I make generalizations, and from there I come to some conclusion or evaluative assessment of it. So that is inductive kind of reasoning. You move from the very basics upwards, that is bottom up. So that is why we say that linguistics involves inductive reasoning. Linguistics is a scientific study. Therefore, we use a lot of basic information first, and we divide the language into its components, and then we come to conclusions. Okay, to conclude, deductive reasoning means moving from the general to the particular. You have the general first, you have a overall view first, and then we look at the particular, the final components. So from the general understanding of an utterance to its final points. For example, if somebody says that it looks like it's going to be cats and dogs this evening. So because you're familiar with the expression rain, cats, and dogs, you will be able to make this deductive reasoning and understand that this man is saying that it might rain today evening. At the same time, if your knowledge of English language is very low, you will not be able to understand that using deductive knowledge. You will need to use inductive knowledge at that point. That is, you will look at cats, dogs, etc., and try to come to a sense. That is what you're doing is you're looking at the basic units and you're analyzing it. You're saying it looks like it's going to rain. It's going, the word rain is not mentioned. It's going to be cats and dogs. So you know the meaning of cats, you know the meaning of dogs, but then you are not able to make sense of it. So that is what happens to a beginner in language learning. He will need to apply a lot of inductive reasoning, and then finally he will need to look up in the dictionary and find out what it means. And then an advanced learner will be using deductive reasoning more, while an initial learner will be applying more of an inductive method in his understanding. That is about language learning. But in research and in the domain of knowledge, what you need more is perhaps inductive. Even if you have a deductive knowledge, you see a fire in the neighborhood. From your general knowledge, it looks like a fire, but then you really want to go and find out what happened and if it is really a fire inside a house or it is something else, etc., etc. So that is the inductive that gives you a scientific information about things. I hope that point is clear. കുറെ പേർക്ക് കയറാൻ പറ്റുന്നില്ല. വാട്ട് ദേ ക്യാൻ ഡു ഇസ് അവരുടെ ആ ലിങ്ക് ഒന്ന് അവരോട് പറയൂ, ആ പേജ് ഒന്ന് അപ്ഡേറ്റ് ഒന്ന് റിഫ്രഷ് ചെയ്തിട്ട് ആ ലിങ്കിൽ ട്രൈ ചെയ്യാൻ പറയൂ. കാരണം അത് പഴയ ലിങ്ക് ആയിരിക്കും അതിൽ കിടക്കുന്നത്, അതുകൊണ്ടാണ് കയറാൻ പറ്റാത്തത്. അവരോട് റിഫ്രഷ് ചെയ്തതിന് ശേഷം ആ ലിങ്ക് ട്രൈ ചെയ്യാൻ പറയും. അല്ലെങ്കിൽ അത് ക്ലോസ് ചെയ്തിട്ട് ഒന്നുകൂടെ ആ PDF പോയി എടുക്കാൻ പറഞ്ഞാൽ മതി. ദെൻ ദേ വിൽ ബി ഏബിൾ ടു ആക്സസ്. അപ്പോൾ നമ്മൾ ടോപ്പ് ഡൗൺ ബോട്ടം അപ്പ് പ്രോസസ്സിങ് പറഞ്ഞു. ഇത് ഒന്ന് ഇപ്പൊ ഞാനിത് പറഞ്ഞ ഒരു കൺഫ്യൂഷനിൽ ഇരിക്കായിരിക്കും, പക്ഷെ ഈ നോളജ് വളരെ കൺവീനിയന്റ് ആണ്. നമ്മൾ ഒന്ന് രണ്ട് കാര്യങ്ങൾ ഓർത്താൽ മതി. ഡിഡക്റ്റീവ് റീസണിങ് എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ ഫ്രം ദി ജനറൽ ടു ദ പർട്ടിക്കുലർ ആണ്. ഇൻഡക്റ്റീവ് മീൻസ് ഫ്രം ദി പർട്ടിക്കുലർ ടു ദി ജനറൽ. നമ്മളത് ലാംഗ്വേജ് സ്റ്റഡിയിൽ ഒരുപാട് ഉപയോഗിക്കുന്ന വാക്കാണ്. ഗ്രാമർ പഠിക്കുന്നതിനെ കുറിച്ചൊക്കെ പറയുമ്പോൾ നമ്മൾ പറയും വാട്ട് വി നീഡ് ഇസ് ആൻ ഇൻഡക്റ്റീവ്. ഡിഡക്റ്റീവ് മെത്തേഡാണ് നല്ലത് എന്ന് പറയും. ഒരുപാട് പുസ്തകങ്ങളൊക്കെ വായിച്ചതിന് ശേഷം അതിൽ നിന്ന് ഭാഷയുടെ സ്ട്രക്ചർ സ്വാഭാവികമായി നമുക്ക് കിട്ടുന്ന മെത്തേഡിനെയാണ് ഡിഡക്റ്റീവ് എന്ന് പറയുന്നത്. അതേസമയം ഗ്രാമർ എല്ലാം ഇങ്ങനെ പഠിച്ച് അതിന്റെ പുറത്ത് ഇങ്ങനെ ബിൽഡ് ചെയ്യാനുള്ള ശ്രമമാണ് ഇൻഡക്റ്റീവ് എന്ന് പറയുന്നത്. ഈ രണ്ടു തരം റീസണിങ് നമുക്ക് പ്രധാനമാണ്, നമുക്ക് യൂസ്ഫുൾ ആണെങ്കിലും അത് ചില സ്ഥലങ്ങളിൽ ഇൻഡക്റ്റീവ് ആണ് കൂടുതൽ നല്ലത്, ചില സ്ഥലങ്ങളിൽ ഡിഡക്റ്റീവ് ആണ് കൂടുതൽ നല്ലത്. കാരണം നമ്മളിപ്പോൾ ഒരു പത്രം കിട്ടി, ആ പത്രം എടുത്ത് വെച്ചിട്ട് നമ്മൾ ഒരു പാഠപുസ്തകം വായിക്കും പോലെ വായിക്കാൻ ശ്രമിക്കുകയാണെങ്കിൽ 4 ദിവസം എടുക്കും ഒരു ദിവസത്തെ പത്രം വായിക്കാൻ. അപ്പൊ അദ്ദേഹത്തിന്റെ ബാക്കി ദിവസങ്ങളിലെ പത്രമൊക്കെ അടുക്കി വയ്ക്കും. മരിച്ചാലും പത്രം വായിച്ചു തീരില്ല. അവിടെ വേണ്ടത് ഓടിച്ചിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു വായനയാണ്. മേ ബി എ മോർ ഓഫ് എ ഡിഡക്റ്റീവ് കൈൻഡ് ഓഫ് തിങ്. ബിക്കോസ് വെൻ യു ലുക്ക് അറ്റ് ദി പേപ്പർ യു നോ ഈ ഭാഗത്ത് ഇന്ന വാർത്ത ആയിരിക്കാം എന്നുള്ളത് നമുക്ക് അറിവുണ്ട്. അവിടെ നമ്മൾ ചില ഭാഗങ്ങൾ മാത്രമേ നോക്കുകയുള്ളൂ. അത്തരത്തിലുള്ള ഒരു പഠനം. അല്ല, ഇൻഡക്റ്റീവായിട്ട് പത്രം ഒരിക്കലും നമുക്ക് വായിക്കാൻ പറ്റില്ല. ഇതുപോലെയാണ് ജീവിതത്തിലെ കാര്യങ്ങൾ. ഒരു കല്യാണക്കുറി കിട്ടിയാലും നമ്മൾ അതിനെ എന്താണ് ഇൻഡക്റ്റീവായിട്ട് ഇരുന്ന് ആപാത ചൂടം പഠിക്കാൻ ശ്രമിക്കാറില്ല. ദോസ് തിങ്സ് ആർ ദേർ എന്ന് ഓർക്കാൻ വേണ്ടി പറഞ്ഞതാണ്. ഓക്കെ. So this is a science because it follows the process of induction, and the method is inductive and not deductive. We said all that. Right. And in another aspect that makes linguistics scientific is experimentation. The scientist conducts experiments to test whether the observed fact fits the hypothesis formulated. You have a set of hypothesis and you work on that. So when you do research in linguistics or in English language teaching, you'll use many scientific tools. Unlike when you do a literature-based study in linguistics or applied linguistics, because English teaching comes under applied linguistics, you will be using many scientific tools, analytical tools. And so finally, based on inductive and deductive reasoning, you come up with the formulation of a law. So that is very important, formulation of a law. So here you must have a clear idea of what we mean by law. So don't walk on this particular side of the road. That is the law. It is not that law we use here. Law is used with a different sense. So based on, let's read this. When the scientist is dissatisfied with the hypothesis, accounts accurately for most of the data, he formulates his hypothesis as a law. not a law to be obeyed, but a law in the sense of a concise description of phenomena. So the word law here means a concise description of phenomena. We use the word law in that sense also. For example, in the video I mentioned a while ago, there is a video called Grimm's Law and Werner's Law. What is Grimm's Law? Grimm's Law explains a few sound changes that happened in many languages. And the impact can be seen in English also. That's why we learn the Grimm's Law. So it's law. It's law, not the law of the land. It is a setting down of a few very unchanging facts. That is what we mean by law here. So that is formulation of a law means formulation of a statement of or a description of phenomena that has been that we have come to after making a lot of inductive fact-based observations. So that is why all these hold when we talk about linguistics. Linguistics is a scientific study which involves all these things. അതെ, നമ്മുടെ ഈ ഓൺലൈൻ ക്ലാസ് ഏത് പ്ലാറ്റ്ഫോമിൽ ആണ് നമ്മൾ ഉപയോഗിക്കുന്നതെങ്കിലും അതിനകത്ത് പ്രശ്നങ്ങളുണ്ട്. കാരണം ഈ കണക്ടിവിറ്റിയുടെ പ്രശ്നം, കാലാവസ്ഥയുടെ പ്രശ്നം, ഇലക്ട്രിസിറ്റി ഉണ്ടാവാതിരിക്കുക തുടങ്ങിയ ഒരുപാട് പ്രശ്നങ്ങളുണ്ട്. അതുകൊണ്ട് അതാണ് ഞാൻ വീണ്ടും വീണ്ടും പറയുന്നത്, ക്ലാസ്സിന് പുറമെ ഓൾറെഡി ഇതിൻ്റെയൊക്കെ വീഡിയോസ് ഉണ്ട്. ക്ലാസ്സുകളുടെയും പരമാവധി റെക്കോർഡിങ്സ് വിൽ ബി മെയ്ഡ് അവൈലബിൾ. അതുകൊണ്ട് നിങ്ങൾക്ക് അതിനെക്കുറിച്ച് യാതൊരു ഉത്കണ്ഠയും വേണ്ട. നിങ്ങളെക്കാൾ കൂടുതൽ അതിനെക്കുറിച്ച് ഞാൻ ബോധവാനാണ്. പറ്റുന്ന കാര്യങ്ങളെല്ലാം അതിനു വേണ്ടിയിട്ട് ചെയ്യും. Okay, now we come to another aspect of linguistics. Linguists are interested in what is said and what they think ought to be said. So this is what we call science generally does that. Science describes, science observes, studies, and comes to certain assumptions and says this is how it is, rather than saying this is how it should be. It is not codification of rules. It is setting down of observed facts. That is what research does, actually. You might make recommendations, but you will not say that this is how it should be. So linguistics, modern linguistics particularly, attempts to describe a language in all its aspects rather than prescribe rules about correctness. Okay. So this paragraph is important. It contains many serious observations. Linguists observe the use of language and not the rules. Formerly, when we talk about traditional times, which we will come to after a while, when there was a time when linguistics or the study of languages was a lot rule-based, where rules were fixed and people insisted that these rules should be kept. But language is something that constantly changes. And so in modern days, linguistics looks at the use of language, not whether they keep any particular rule. And also, there is no higher variety and accepted varieties. Well, we'll explain that more later. But again, in Malayalam speech also, we would consider people who talk an elegant kind of Malayalam to be very respectful. So we say that the Malayalam that is heard in mid-Travancore is the standard. And some people would say that the Malayalam heard in mid-north is the standard, like between, say, Thrissur and Kozhikode is the best language. But actually, there are no such best things. There is no standard. Every educated person would speak a kind of neutral Malayalam. But all the Malayalam language varieties that are heard in all parts of Kerala are equally important. Because of an illiterate fisherman speaking to his neighbor is very, very important to him and his neighbor, though it may not be very, it may sound a little odd to another set of people living in another part of the state. But to the people using that language, with all its singularities, is very important for that person. So we accept that with all kind of respect. So there is, we accept all varieties. We do not insist that the other day I was interacting with some students in Calicut region, and I heard them talk Malayalam, and his teacher was asking cordially, "Is it raining?" And he said, "Cherungane മഴ പെയ്യുന്നു." So that is Cherungane means ചെറുതായിട്ട്. So that is his dialect. To him, that is very important. You cannot laugh at him and say, you shouldn't say Cherungane, it should be something else. He would correct you if he hears a different version. So as far as that individual is concerned, his dialect is very sacrosanct to him. So there is no high or low as far as language is concerned. And again, modern linguistics looks at the spoken form as being more important than the written form. So the spoken aspect came first. In life also, you start speaking first and you start writing much later. In the history of language also, the spoken aspect came much, much before writing came. Human beings learned to write only, say, 3,000, 4,000 years ago, though he has been talking or using some kind of language for over maybe a couple of tens of thousands of years. So linguists look first at the spoken word, which preceded the written in every way. And then linguistics are also opposed to the notion that any one language can provide an adequate framework for all the others. Linguists would question the superiority or the standard claim of any particular language, because in India, for example, even in Kerala, maybe some 100 years back, Malayalam was studied using the grammatical framework of Sanskrit. In Europe, maybe 150 or 200 years back, English was attempted to be studied against a Latin framework, which is actually very absurd. No language can be studied within the framework of another language, because each language works on a totally different logic, which is a very delightful area of study. So linguistics can be very fascinating if you apply your mind and if you start liking it. അപ്പോൾ അതാണ് നമ്മൾ ലിംഗ്വിസ്റ്റിക്സിനെ കുറിച്ചുള്ള ഇൻട്രഡക്ടറി ആയിട്ടുള്ള കാര്യങ്ങൾ. ഇതിൽ പറയുന്ന പല കാര്യങ്ങളും നമ്മളിനി റിപ്പീറ്റ് ചെയ്യും. അതുകൊണ്ട് ഇതെല്ലാം ഒന്ന് ശ്രദ്ധിച്ചോളൂ. ഓക്കെ, ചില ഭാഗങ്ങൾ I leave because it's very detailed. You can read later. ഓക്കെ, ഞാൻ ഈ സയൻസ് ആണോ എന്നുള്ള ഭാഗം നമ്മൾ ഓൾറെഡി പറഞ്ഞു കഴിഞ്ഞു. ലിംഗ്വിസ്റ്റിക്സ് ഒരു സയൻസ് ആണ്. ലിംഗ്വിസ്റ്റിക്സ് ടേക്സ് എ എംപെറിക്കൽ rather than a speculative or intuitive approach. നമ്മുടെ ഡിഡക്റ്റീവ് റീസണിങ്, ഡിഡക്ഷനിൽ വരുന്ന കാര്യമാണ്. ഇൻറ്റ്യൂഷൻ എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ നമുക്ക് തോന്നുന്നതാണ്. ഒരു കാര്യം കണ്ടു കഴിയുമ്പോൾ ഇന്നതാണ് എന്ന് പെട്ടെന്ന് നമ്മളങ്ങ് അസസ് ചെയ്യും. അത് നമ്മുടെ എക്സ്പീരിയൻസ് വെച്ചിട്ടാണ് നമ്മളത് ചെയ്യുന്നത്. നമ്മൾ ഭാഷ പഠിക്കാൻ ശ്രമിക്കുമ്പോൾ നമ്മൾ ഇംഗ്ലീഷിൽ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ മലയാളത്തിലൊക്കെ സംസാരിക്കാൻ നോക്കുന്നു. നമ്മളൊരു സിനിമയുടെ പോസ്റ്റർ കാണുമ്പോൾ തന്നെ നമ്മൾ ഇത് ഇന്നതായിരിക്കും നമുക്ക് ഏകദേശം ഒരു ഐഡിയ കിട്ടും. അത് എന്തുകൊണ്ടാണ് നമുക്കിത് പറ്റുന്നത്? അല്ലെങ്കിൽ നമ്മൾ ഫോണിൽ വിളിക്കുമ്പോൾ അയാൾ സംസാരിച്ച് തുടങ്ങുന്ന രീതി കേൾക്കുമ്പോൾ തന്നെ നമുക്ക് ഏകദേശം മനസ്സിലാവും എന്താണ് അവിടെ സംഭവിക്കാൻ പോകുന്നത്, എന്ത് തരത്തിലുള്ള കോൾ ആണെന്നൊക്കെ നമുക്ക് മനസ്സിലാവും. ദിസ് ഇസ് ബേസ്ഡ് ഓൺ അവർ എക്സ്പീരിയൻസ്. നമ്മുടെ പ്രയർ എക്സ്പീരിയൻസിനെ ബേസ് ചെയ്തിട്ടുള്ളതാണ്. അത് നമ്മുടെ മനസ്സിൽ എല്ലാത്തിനെ കുറിച്ച് ഒരുപാട് പാറ്റേൺസ് നമ്മുടെ മനസ്സിൽ ഫോം ചെയ്യും. നമ്മളിങ്ങനെ മുതിർന്ന് വരും തോറും, ജനിച്ച് വളർന്ന് കോഗ്നിഷനിലൊക്കെ സ്ട്രോങ് ആയി വരുന്ന മുറയ്ക്കും ത്രൂ ഔട്ട് യുവർ ലൈഫ് യു വിൽ ബി ഫോമിങ് ഡിഫറെന്റ് പാറ്റേൺസ് ഇങ്ങനെ ഫോം ചെയ്ത് നമ്മുടെ മനസ്സാകുന്ന ഹാർഡ് ഡിസ്കിനകത്ത് ഇങ്ങനെ സൂക്ഷിച്ചു വയ്ക്കും. അപ്പൊ നമ്മളൊരു പുതിയ ഇൻഫർമേഷൻ വരുമ്പോൾ നമ്മൾ ആ ഒരു ഫ്രെയിം വർക്കിന് എഗൻസ്റ്റ് ആയിട്ടാണ് അതിനെ മനസ്സിലാക്കാൻ ശ്രമിക്കുന്നത്. അപ്പൊ അത് നമുക്ക് പരിചയമില്ലാത്തൊരു കാര്യം വരുമ്പോൾ ഒരു അമ്പരപ്പ് ഒക്കെ ഉണ്ടാവും. അപ്പൊ ഈ പരിചയമില്ലാത്ത കാര്യം പക്ഷെ നമ്മൾ കുറെ കഴിയുമ്പോൾ നമ്മൾ അസിമുലേറ്റ് ചെയ്തിട്ട് നമ്മുടെ ഒരു സിസ്റ്റത്തിനകത്താക്കി വെക്കും. ഇങ്ങനെയുള്ള ഓരോന്നിനെയും ഓരോ സ്കീമ എന്ന് പറയും. ഇപ്പം നമുക്ക് ഒരു മാർക്കറ്റ് പ്ലേസിൽ പോകുമ്പോൾ ഉണ്ടാകുന്ന സംഭവങ്ങൾ എന്തൊക്കെയാണ്, അതിൻ്റെ ഒരു സ്കീമ നമ്മുടെ മനസ്സിലുണ്ട്. അപ്പം നമ്മളത് തയ്യാറായിട്ട് നമ്മൾ അതനുസരിച്ച് കടയിലേക്ക് പോകും. പ്ലാസ്റ്റിക് ബാഗുകൾ ഇപ്പം അത്ര നല്ലതല്ല എന്നറിയാവുന്നത് നമ്മൾ ഒരു പക്ഷേ ഒരു ബാഗും കൊണ്ട് കടയിലേക്ക് പോകുമായിരിക്കും. ദാറ്റ് ഇസ് ബിക്കോസ് വി ഹാവ് എ സ്കീമ അവൈലബിൾ. ഇതുപോലെ എല്ലാ കാര്യം ബാങ്കിൽ പോകുമ്പോൾ എന്താണ് പ്രതീക്ഷിക്കേണ്ടത്, ബാങ്കിൽ പോകുമ്പോൾ ഉള്ള ആൻറ്റിസിപ്പേറ്റ് ചെയ്യാൻ സാധ്യതയുള്ള ലാംഗ്വേജ് ട്രാൻസാക്ഷൻസ്, അവിടെ പോകുമ്പോൾ നമുക്ക് ചെയ്യേണ്ടി വരുന്ന കാര്യം ഇതൊക്കെ കൂടെ കൊണ്ടുപോകണം. ഇതിനെക്കുറിച്ചെല്ലാം നമുക്കൊരു സ്കീമ നമ്മുടെ മനസ്സിലുണ്ട്. അപ്പോൾ അതാണ് നമ്മുടെ പ്രീ എക്സിസ്റ്റിംഗ് നോളജ്. അപ്പം നമ്മൾ റീസണിങ്ങിനകത്ത് ഈ ഡിഡക്റ്റീവ് റീസണിങ്ങിൽ നമ്മൾ കൂടുതലും നമ്മൾ ഈ സ്കീമയാണ് ഉപയോഗിക്കുന്നത്. നമ്മളത് വായിക്കുകയോ ഗ്രഹിക്കുകയോ മനസ്സിലാക്കാൻ ശ്രമിക്കുമ്പോൾ ഇമ്മീഡിയറ്റ്ലി നമ്മുടെ മനസ്സിൽ ഓൾറെഡി ഉള്ള സ്കീമയെ അപ്ലൈ ചെയ്യും. പിന്നെ അതിൻ്റെ പുറത്ത് നമ്മൾ ബിൽഡ് ചെയ്ത് പോകും. ഇൻഡക്റ്റീവ് റീസണിങ്ങിൽ നമ്മൾ സ്കീമ ഉപയോഗിക്കും. നമ്മൾ ബേസിക്സ് ഇന്ന് പഠിച്ചു തുടങ്ങുമെന്ന് പറഞ്ഞല്ലോ, സയൻസ്. നേരത്തെ ഐ ഷോഡ് യു ദി ഇമേജ്, ഐ ഷോ യു ദി ഇമേജ് അഗൈൻ. ഇൻഡക്റ്റീവ് റീസണിങ്ങിൽ നമ്മൾ അടിയിൽ നിന്ന് ഇങ്ങനെ ബിൽഡ് ചെയ്ത് പോവാം. ഫ്രം ബോട്ടം വി മൂവ് അപ്വേർഡ്സ്. അതാണ് ഈ ബോട്ടം അപ്പ് എന്ന് പറയുന്നത്. ബോട്ടം അപ്വേർഡ്സ്, ആ ഡിറക്ഷനാണ് ബോട്ടം അപ്പ്. അപ്പം വെൻ വി മൂവ് അപ്വേർഡ്സ്, നമ്മൾ ഈ ബേസിക് ഡേറ്റ, തുടക്കത്തിലുള്ള ഡേറ്റയ്ക്കകത്ത് നമ്മുടെ എക്സിസ്റ്റിംഗ് നോളജ് ഉണ്ടാവും. നമ്മൾ ചില ആരിൽ നിന്നെങ്കിലും കളക്ട് ചെയ്ത ഇൻഫർമേഷൻ ഉണ്ടാവും. പിന്നെ നമ്മൾ ഒബ്സർവ് ചെയ്യുന്ന ഫാക്ട്സും ഉണ്ടാവും. ഇത് മൂന്നും കൂടെ ചേരുമ്പോഴാണ് നമുക്ക് സയന്റിഫിക് ആയിട്ട് ഓരോ കൺക്ലൂഷൻസിൽ എത്തിച്ചേരാൻ പറ്റുന്നത്. നിങ്ങൾ ഗവേഷണം ചെയ്യുമ്പോഴും, വെൻ യു റൈറ്റ് എ പ്രോജക്ട്, വെൻ യു ഡു എ റിസർച്ച് ഓൾസോ, ദിസ് ഇസ് വാട്ട് യു വിൽ ബി ഡൂയിങ്. യു ഹാവ് മെറ്റീരിയൽ, യു ഹാവ് യുവർ നോളജ് അബൌട്ട് ഇറ്റ് that was there even before you started working on it, and then you have the knowledge that is available, and then you put these together and you start studying. അപ്പം നമ്മുടെ ഓരോ അസംഷൻ ഇതിൻ്റെയൊക്കെ ബേസ് ചെയ്തിട്ട് ഇങ്ങനെ പോകും. ഇവിടെ എത്രത്തോളം പ്രജുഡിസ് ഇല്ലാതിരിക്കാമോ അത്രയും സയന്റിഫിക് ആയിട്ടായിരിക്കും നമ്മുടെ റിസൾട്ട് വരുന്നത്. Now we come to okay, now we look at the scope and nature of linguistics. So linguistics covers a wide area of topics, and its boundaries are not exactly definable. Particularly today, the boundaries of linguistics have become very uncertain. It has become very wide. You talk about forensic linguistics. So all kinds of maybe 100 different branches of linguistics can be there. You know, when you investigate a case, an expert might be able to help in terms of deciphering the language that a person uses, that is spoken language. And maybe you'll need to identify somebody's handwriting. So there is a forensic application of linguistic knowledge. And so many, psycholinguistics, computational linguistics, so many linguistics are there. Now let us look at this image. Look at different branches of linguistics which occur in the peripheral circle here, and the essential elements of linguistics which are encompassed in these inner circles. So maybe central would be phonetics, then phonology. We'll be looking at this in detail. So phonetics, then phonology, maybe these together will form one entity. So you have sounds at the center, and then you have syntax, you have semantics, you have pragmatics. In between there is morphology, which maybe they have included within syntax. Morphology is important. So you have phonetics, phonology, morphology, syntax, semantics. Syntax is the order in which you arrange words. So whether I say I am going home or going home I or home going I, that is syntax. You know, from what I said, you might have felt that in English syntax is fixed. So I always have to say I am going home. I cannot say going home I. Well, poetically I might say that, but cow eats grass. When you change the order, it becomes eats grass cow, or grass eats cow. So then the sense is lost. In English, that the syntax is very rigid, whereas in Malayalam that is not so. Njan pogunnu, njan veetil pogunnu, pogunnu njan veetil, veetil pogunnu njan. Whichever way I say, the meaning is conveyed. That is because in Malayalam the syntax is not rigid. Why is that? That is something we will discuss a little later. Semantics is a study of meaning. Pragmatics is the study of how all these things work out in life. So all these things are components. We'll be looking at all these. This is basically, in the next sessions, we'll be looking at phonetics, phonology, morphology, syntax, semantics, and pragmatics. And the peripheral circle, you have different divisions of linguistics. So linguistics Sociolinguistics tells us how language works in a society. Perhaps it's the most important aspect or basic aspect of linguistics because language is the product of a society. Language cannot exist without at least one additional person, as I said. You do not sit alone and use language. You can do that. You can meditate using language. You can write something in language. You can read something in language. But actual use of language in speech, primarily that is what language is meant for, will not happen without at least one person. So language is the property of a society. And language within a society, language works in ways over which we have little control. That's what I was saying, that there will be different slangs, different dialectal variations, a lot of changes will keep happening to language when it works within a society. All those things are studied under sociolinguistics. We will do a bit of sociolinguistics in the course of the paper you are looking at. Then you have anthropological linguistics, philosophical linguistics, stylistics. Stylistics is applying linguistics in appreciating literary works. You have computational linguistics, which is related to artificial intelligence. Then you have applied linguistics. Well, applied, we teachers, I am, and you are preparing to be applied linguists. When you become teachers of English language, you are using applied linguistics. So then psycholinguistics, the relation between your brain and the way in which language develops in the brain, this is also very, very important branch and very complex and important. See, this philosophical linguistics, for example, helps philosophy more than it helps linguistics. But psycholinguistics helps language also. It gives us the language to talk about language. Psycholinguistics is a very crucial area. We will be looking at psycholinguistics also in the course of the paper. So these are the main divisions of linguistics. You have the divisions within the circles and the in the peripheral circles. So now we are going to look at the different aspects one by one quickly, but we'll be looking at in detail in the coming sessions. But we'll look at the different aspects, these as phonetics, phonology, morphology, syntax, etc. Phonetics is the study of human speech. And it is at the center because speech is the basic unit. And sounds are the most basic units of speech. Phonetics, this is to be pronounced as phonetics. Phoneticians are concerned with the actual physical sounds, the raw material out of which language is made. Here, there's a reference to Pygmalion. Pygmalion is a play written by Bernard Shaw. It has been made into a very successful movie named My Fair Lady. It's worth watching. It's about phonetics. So Professor Higgins is a phonologist, a phonetician who he believes that language should be monolithic in the sense that that was a belief in those days. Bernard Shaw himself believed that language essentially has a standard form and there should be no deviation. So in this play, you have Professor Higgins, who is a phonetician, who finds a flower girl who speaks a very rude kind of English. So he finds that English despicable. There is in the movie there is a song. Speak, if I wonder whether I should take this woman out and hang her for the cold-blooded murder of the English tongue. That's a very conservative outlook towards language. The language, the language of the elite in Britain, Higgins considers to be the proper one. And the English of Eliza Doolittle, which is Cockney, which is the English of uneducated people living in suburban London, is condemned by Professor Higgins. But the interesting thing is that the majority of the people in England at that time, or in London area at that time, spoke the language that Doolittle, Eliza spoke. So that takes us back to the statement we made a while ago that there is no standard language. Modern linguistics is interested in all varieties of language and considers all varieties with equal significance. So Pygmalion is a very amusing play to read. Maybe I've read it 7 to 8 times, not recently though. And the movie is also exquisitely taken and it's eminently enjoyable. So that the play should be read by every literature language student, and the movie should also be watched by every language and literature student. But again, you must watch it with the notion that it's a very conservative approach towards language learning. So that is phonetics. Phonetics again is a phonetics is devoid of actual use. So I go about describing that these are the sounds of this language. I analyze, put them in little boxes. So I'm not worried about how these sounds come together and work in real life. I am only worried about those little languages. For example, in the movie My Fair Lady, Eliza makes a long sound, ow kind of sound. And Professor Higgins counts and says there are about 120 vowels in her utterance. So he is interested in that. So look at the very prosaic interest that he has, which is again very amusing too. From a scholarly point of view, it's very amusing. But from the point of view of actual life, it need not be so amusing. Anyway, that is the interest of a phonetician. A phonetician is interested in the excellent production of a sound, explaining the quality of a sound, describing the sound, telling you how it is articulated. Well, but phonology goes one step further. You can say that phonetics is part of phonology. Phonology looks at how these sounds work in actual speech. So then when they are connected, there may be slight changes happening. So phonology describes all those changes. Then the next aspect is morphology, which is somehow not mentioned here. Morphology is the written form. So you have the written form. Example, you say riverside, and then you write it riverside. And the written thing will be very different from the spoken thing. So in the written form, the shape of the written word is morphology. So that's again a very important part of linguistics. So from morphology, we move to semantics. Semantics is the meaning part. So you make utterances, and unless somebody else understands, there is no point. So semantics is important. Semantics is what looks at the meaning conveyed. Then you have syntax. Syntax is the order in which the words are arranged. You have the morphology study where words are studied. You have 5 words in a sentence, and you see how they are arranged. As I was telling you a while before, I went out and had some. I went out and bought a banana. So there, I went out and bought a banana. So I have 7 words. I have arranged them in a particular sequence. If I change the sequence, I may change the meaning, or I may fail to convey any meaning at all. So that is what semantics is. And sometimes people use the word semantics as an alternative for grammar, but that is not totally right. Grammar involves semantics, phonetics, syntax, morphology, everything. Because grammar is what helps you understand language, and grammar includes even pronunciation. So the word grammar actually stands out. It doesn't fit into the scheme that we are talking about. Grammar is a logic behind the language, which is encompassed in all these aspects. Even pronunciation, we can sometimes say, is part of grammar. So these are important things. Yeah, we talked about, yes. So I think we will have a break now and come back after 10 minutes, less than 10 minutes, 5, 6, 7 minutes, and we will continue. And therefore, we come to this aspect. Language is symbolic. It is symbolic and it is arbitrary. These 2 words we should remember. Yeah, language uses words as symbols. So in writing, we use written symbols, orthographic symbols, and in speech, you would use sound symbols. For example, the word dog in Hindi, in English, it is dog. In German, it is Hund, from which English hound is to which English hound is related. And how this happens, how many German words, English words, Hindi words Russian words are seem to be related. For example, you have door in English, Dwaraga in Hindi or some Sanskrit, Dwera in Russian. Hmm? You have red in English, Rudhiram in Sanskrit. You have heart in English and Hardavam in Sanskrit and cordial in Latin. So all these words are related, not because recently a teacher sent me a mail saying he has written a book saying how Hindi is the mother of English. Actually, that is because he did not do a proper linguistic study. You cannot say that English is the mother of Hindi or Hindi is the mother of English, because English, Hindi, modern German, Russian, they're all kind of cousins, you can say, because they all evolved from one single language, which existed maybe 5,000, 6,000 years ago. So we have a large language family called Indo-European language family, of which English is a member, German is a member, Greek is a member, Italian is a member, Iranian is a member, Russian is a member, Yugoslavian is a member, Baltic languages are members. Even the language spoken in Sri Lanka, Sinhalese, is a member of the Indo-European family. Very interesting. At the same time, in the southern part of India, Telugu, Kannada, Tamil, and Malayalam are not Indo-European languages. They may have many Indo-European words in them because they are borrowed words. For example, in Malayalam, we have a randal, which is actually a corruption of the English word landar. I mean, we have landar vilakku or randal vilakku, which is a corruption of lantern. But that's a different thing. We borrowed from English. We adapted a word from English. But many Sanskrit, Hindi words have come into Malayalam. Therefore, many Malayalam words might sound similar to Sanskrit words. They are borrowings. That's a different thing. Hindi came from Sanskrit. Sanskrit is a mother language in this part of the world, from which Hindi, Marathi, Kashmiri, Bihari, Odia, all those languages gradually evolved. That always happens. At least it used to happen a lot in linguistic history. A language breaking into smaller languages. Simply when human communities migrate to different parts away from the parent language, they will undergo divergent development and they become different language. If you look at my video called Indo-European languages, I have graphically described that, which is an essential knowledge that you should have. Okay, so here there's a dog and in English and Hund in German. I was saying that in English there is a hound, which is related to this Hund. That doesn't mean English people took it from German. That is because German and English came from a single language, which we call Germanic. So yeah, all those we know. The word dog is an animal we all know. It has many different words in different languages. That is a simple fact that is attempted here. In Hindi, it has a word. In Tamil, it has another word. In Malayalam, it has another word. Different world languages, there are different words. But that means that this word dog or kutta or nai or hund doesn't have any significance other than the significance given to it by the language community. So in a particular language community, a word has one meaning. In another community, that word may not have any meaning at all, or it could have another meaning. So essentially, language or these words are only symbols for something else. And the meaning is very, very arbitrary. Except for the onomatopic sounds like rumble, murmur, creak, gurgle, bang, swish, flutter, buzz, hum, etc. These are onomatopic, and these may be, the meaning may be implied by the word itself. When I say it, when bang, I may understand that there is an explosion. And some birds, for example, kaka, you may understand it's an onomatopic sound. Other than that, all the words in the world of all languages are symbolic, and the meaning is arbitrary. What is arbitrary? Arbitrary means the meaning is something that is separate from the word. This is something that is given to it. I say that this word has this particular meaning. And you would have noticed that when children are young, they may use words for their needs. They may call some favorite food they like by a different name. They may call their mother by a different name. For a period, to that child, that is a special word. So that is an arbitrary use of that particular word that the child makes. So for a near relative like a cousin, a child may give another name. It may be the corruption of the child's real name. It could be something, so many names inside the family. The popular names would evolve like that. A child trying to pronounce a name and ending up saying something else. And that word arbitrarily comes to have a significance within that family. I can have many examples within my family for people coming to have a name at home through the mispronunciation of his original name. This happens. So what I'm saying is, all this is an arbitrary thing. You say that this word has this meaning, and that meaning is there. So that is important. And what are the functions of language? This is another set that we should have in some information of. Language is used for communication, that is passing information. Language is used to persuade other people to do something, that is you to get things done. This is also part of communication, but to persuade people, we use language. To convey ideas, information, we use language. And you will know that these two languages are different. The language I would use to communicate to you an idea and trying to persuade you to do something are two different kinds of languages that I'll be using. That is a kind of knowledge you will be gaining when you study a language in an advanced level. We entertain ourselves or other people. Language is used for literary purposes. So that is literature, like a poem or a play or a movie in which you have dialogues, and we express our membership in a particular group. This is very important. Our group identity. We all have this clan kind of mentality. Human beings are gregarious, social creatures, and we express our membership in a particular community through our language. That is why I said the language spoken by a little tribe in an obscure part of the world is very, very important for them. And we need to respect that language, because that language, that pronunciation, even though it may sound odd to the speakers of the same language in another part, will help that person retain his membership in that particular group. Yeah, we express our individuality. So when this member moves out to another group, he maintains his individuality through his special brand of language. Yeah, we express our moods or emotions. Another important thing, language has a big emotive function. Human beings have this need for expressing their emotions all the time. Human beings are highly emotional beings, and we need to express our moods and our emotions all the time. We do that in poems. We do that in the letters we write to our dear ones. We do that in the novels we create. We do that in the what shall we say, the everyday communication we make with people close to us. So there you have an emotive language, which might have features which is different from other instances of language use. So that is it. And then, relationships with other people, all those things. This is for your general information. And then this is another important aspect of very basic information about language. Well, we are talking about languages, not about English. Keep that in mind. It could apply to Hindi, it could apply to Spanish, any language. So it's Charles F. Hocklet who identified certain inherent features in human language. So he was the first person to do that, though people had a general idea of all these things for long. So one is the language of human beings have a duality of, a duality, a feature called duality is there in human languages. We are talking, language is a human quality, so we are trying to prove that. Now we are going to discuss these things and we are going to prove that language is essentially a human thing. It has nothing to do with I mean, it's not similar to animal communication. One feature is duality. Duality means a human language possesses two subsystems, those of sounds and meaning. A limited set of sound units can be grouped and regrouped into units of meaning. This in turn can be grouped, there is a hierarchical order in language. It has sounds are there, the sound symbols are there, and the meaning is also there. And these are separate from each other. In animal communication, they have a call, for example, for a particular need. For example, when an enemy approaches, a monkey might give a call. That call is directly connected to the significance that an enemy is approaching. It has no duality. There is no difference between that symbol and the connoted significance. So, but in human language, the sounds and meaning are two things. There is a duality there, and it exists in a complex manner. So the sounds are unitary and do not lead them into analysis. Human language is so complex because of this duality between the symbols we use and the message we convey. So that is why human beings are capable of using infinite number of utterances. Unlike animals, the utterances that a dog can make is, if you spend a few years studying dogs, you will make a list of all the possible sounds that the dog is ever going to make. When it is hungry, it could make one kind of sound. When it's in pain, it might make another kind of sound. When it wants to mate with another dog, it will make another kind of sound. And when it feels too hot because of the climate, it may make another sound. When it is thirsty, it might make another sound. A warning call will be different. Sound that it makes when it is very angry would be different. All these things. So, but still it is finite. You can make a list of it. And each of these have a corresponding significance. But in human sense, you can never, ever compile a compendium of all the human utterances that are possible. That will be a very ambitious project, which you will probably die attempting. So, to put it in simple words, duality is the feature which says that language in human beings have a duality, the sound system or the signals that we use, symbols that we use, and the meaning that is signified. Productivity is another aspect of human language. Human language is capable of generating absolutely new messages based on novel experiences. Well, this is related to the previous one. A dog, as I said, will make the same sound for the same purpose, but a human being will express it in 100 different ways. So you can go on. I might have made at least 100 sentences now, 100 utterances now, which I have never before made in that combination in my whole life in the last 1 hour. That is possible. You go on saying new combinations. You go on putting words into new combinations. That is why we have new songs coming up, or we would not have two new poems. New poetry would have been impossible if we did not have this feature called productivity. So all poetry would look the same. That doesn't happen. Even though we have millions and millions of poems, millions and millions of books, we still can have a new book. We can still have a new poem because of this quality called productivity. And arbitrariness, human language opens up the possibility of having a variety of meanings for a given word. Well, that's again the one we said before, almost very similar. Arbitrariness means the word and the meaning is not connected. For example, a bee makes a particular dance to convey the idea that there is honey in maybe 800 yards from the hive, and it will make a particular dance. But whenever it has to convey that idea, he'll make the very same dance. But a human being would not do that. He might use a different way of presenting it in a different occasion. Arbitrariness. Displacement is another very interesting thing. Human communication can contextualize into any given situation, not just from the present circumstance. For example, you are hungry, okay, and you are okay. You had food and you are fine. 5 days later, you explain to somebody about your experience of hunger, and you relive that hunger through your words. So only human beings can do that. A dog cannot cry about a hunger that happened 4 days back. A dog cannot bark now because he was angry 3 days back. It can never do that. It will bark only if it is angry at that particular point of time. But a human being, like Hamlet's Hecuba, you remember the character, the actor who weeps for Hecuba. Who is Hecuba to him and he to Hecuba that he should weep for her. That's what Hamlet asks. Human beings have that quality. You can weep, you can express emotions even about people who are not known to you. You have that ability, the histrionic ability to recreate situations through language. That is displacement. You can talk about, this is closely related to the thing called creativity also. You can uh, express emotions that you are not currently experiencing. That is one thing which we are here primarily talking about. This becomes important only when you understand that we are talking about qualities of language that human beings have and animals do not have. Specialization, human expression is a specialized activity. This is closely related to the previous one. We can talk about hunger when we are not hungry. We can talk about being tired when we are not tired. That kind of thing we can have. But in animals, that is not the case. You will see that the difference between these different qualities are very, very narrow. Interchangeability is another interesting feature. The roles of the speaker and the hearer in a communicative context is not mutually exclusive. Another thing is that among animals, the female animal would have a different cry, a set of cries which only the female of the species has, and a set of cry only the male of the species has. In human beings, that is not the case. Both male and female have the same language. They have the same language, and also only the phonation might be different. In a woman, you might have a different pitch level, but the language is basically the same. That is interchangeability. And also the speaker can repeat exactly the same thing that the listener can repeat exactly the same thing that he heard, even without a cause. For example, in animal communication, an animal might give a warning cry, and the other animals will respond. They wouldn't sit and make the same cry unless such a situation arises. So, but human beings have that ability to do that. You are capable of producing the sound that you listened to. Finally, there are many more. There is a selection here, only 7 have been taken. Another thing is cultural transmission. This is perhaps the most important point is cultural transmission. I always remind students that language is the product of culture. Language is very closely associated with culture. So it is impossible to learn a language properly without learning a little bit about the culture of the language. For example, if you want to learn English, you have to learn English close to the culture. If you want to use English in international context, that is. So very close to the culture languages. And yeah, it is transmitted through culture also. Because a human child is born with the ability to learn language, but it doesn't have language inside. It can only make cries like an animal would cry. He can make cries, he can shout, he can scream, etc. He can laugh, but he does just like an animal can do all these things. Maybe an animal cannot laugh, but many sounds that a human being can make, he is born with. Those are the basic things that is programmed. But language is something that he learns after that. If he never ever heard a word of human speech before, he will grow without any language at all. So if a child is born and it is brought up without exposure to language, which we cannot do, which we cannot even experiment because it would be a heartless thing to do, the child will grow up without a language. He will only make cries and symbols to communicate. That is a feature of, but at the same time, an animal is born with all the necessary communicative cries that it needs in its package. It will have that. So the basic difference between human and animal communication are human language is unlimited and finite. Infinite, that means we know that, yeah, infinite combinations can be there. And in animal communication, there is a limitation to the number of calls. Some animals communicate through pheromones. That is a kind of smell it produces from some glands of its body. And some animals communicate through dances, like the bees do. And some animals communicate through gestures, some facial expressions, grimaces, like the chimpanzees do. And most animals have a sound that it makes to communicate, but all these are limited. Human system is open while animal system is closed. Human system is modifiable, but animal system not modifiable. So you have all these things here. Human system is flexible, animal inflexible, non-instinctive, instinctive. Means like many other things, language is also part of the animal's instinct. Among human beings, it's involuntary cries are instinctive, but language is not instinctive. Language is acquired. The human child acquires language just as it acquires other skills in the society, whereas the animal signal systems are inherited. That is, this simply means that the system that the animals have is not language. So on the left side, we have a list of 12 qualities, which are the features of language, and only human beings have language. Animals have systems of communication. They are non-linguistic in nature. Okay, I understand that some of you are not able to hear. It happens all the time. Nothing can be done about it. നമ്മുടെ ഈ ചില സമയത്ത് അത് എൻ്റെ എന്താണ് ഭാഗത്തുള്ള പ്രശ്നം ആകണമെന്നില്ല അത്. കാരണം ഞാൻ ഒരു പ്രത്യേക മൈക്രോഫോണൊക്കെ വെച്ചിട്ടാണ് സംസാരിക്കുന്നത്. അതിനകത്ത് സൗണ്ട് കട്ടായി പോകാനുള്ള സാധ്യത വളരെ കുറവാണ്. നിങ്ങളുടെ ഇവിടെ നിന്നുള്ള ബാൻഡ് വിഡ്ത്തിൻ്റെയോ നിങ്ങളുടെ ബാൻഡ് വിഡ്ത്തിൻ്റെയോ ഇഷ്യൂ കൊണ്ടാണ് ചിലപ്പോൾ കേൾക്കാൻ പറ്റാത്തത്. അപ്പോൾ അത് നമ്മൾ ഒന്ന് ക്ഷമയോടെ ഇരുന്ന് കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ അല്പം കഴിയുമ്പോൾ ആ പ്രശ്നം അങ്ങ് റിസോൾവ് ആയിക്കോളും. So don't worry if you find experience difficulty in hearing, it will be rectified after a while. Yes, reception problem ഉണ്ട്. Yeah, അതെ നിങ്ങൾ അതും that's another thing. Somebody has said try changing audio device in WebEx system. അപ്പോൾ നിങ്ങളുടെ ലിസണിങ് കുറച്ചുകൂടെ ഇമ്പ്രൂവ് ആകാം. ബിക്കോസ് നിങ്ങൾ ആദ്യമായിട്ടല്ലേ ഇത് ഉപയോഗിക്കുന്നത്. അതിനകത്ത് ചിലപ്പം ഏത് സ്പീക്കർ ആണെന്നുള്ളത് സെലക്ട് ചെയ്യുന്നതിൽ ഇഷ്യൂ കാണും. All such things are possible. Now we are going to look at the basic concepts of linguistics. So as we discussed before, language is an arbitrary system of articulated sounds made use of by human beings for communication. When a language is examined, its sounds, words, sentences, and meanings are studied. Though there are differences of opinion regarding the levels of language structure, the essentially agreed levels of analysis are phonological, morphological, syntactical, and semantical. So we are going to look briefly at what is phonology, what is morphology, what is syntax, and what is semantics. We will study each of these in detail later. So phonology is the organization of sounds into units called phonemes. So phoneme, a phone would be the most basic sound, and a phoneme is the basic meaningful sound that a human being makes. We generally say that a phoneme is the basic human sound. Phonology is a term. Sometimes phonology is used to embrace both phonetics and phonology. Phonology studies what is significant in a particular language as the basic meaningful elements which enter into larger patterns of construction. So phonetics is the study of how a sound is created, how all the sounds that human beings can produce, oral sounds, uh, using pulmonary air, it is kind of studied. That is phonetics. It need not always be pulmonary air, air from the lungs. We use the air that flows out of the lungs to produce language. But in many languages in Africa, for example, people uses click sounds with their tongue without any air from the lungs. Also, people communicate using clicks with the tongue, and sometimes a sound is produced by taking the breath in, and the sound is produced at the throat. So things are possible in human speech, but basically, it is the sound from the that emanates from the lungs, through the throat, through the mouth, through the nose, and then you have speech. Yeah, that is phonology. Phonetics is the basic units of speech, and phonology studies how all these little units come together and become effective in conveying meaning. So phonetics studies are basic raw materials of speech. It does not concern with any particular language. But phonology of a language is the selection of the selection of the sounds in that language and how they operate when they come into combinations. That is phonology. Then morphology is that part of language which is considered with the study and analysis of the structure, form, and classes of words. So morphology is the study of written language, where the primary unit is word. If you look at this word morphology itself, you have morph as one part of it. You can say that the root part of the word is morph. Morph means essentially shape. So logos is there. Logos is the study of. So that is another word actually. It's another root word. Morpho or morph is shape and logos is knowledge. So this word has two roots in it, and yeah, So such kind of analysis you can. This is a word which is made of two morphs, I can say. And let me look at and look at another here. Organize is one part and shin is another part. The shin is a suffix, organization. So you have organization, you have organize, and then a shin. That there are two morphs are there. You can say that in this word there are two morphs. Here you have morpho and logi as two words. And here morphemes. Morpheme is one morpheme, and S is another morpheme. Okay. So I hope you understood. But we'll look at this in detail later, so don't worry even if you do not understand. In discovery, again, is very interesting. This is a morph, which is a suffix. Cover is a root word, is again a morph, and morpheme, and you have ing as a suffix. So that is when you when you analyze the parts of a word. This is again another very interesting study, which will help you like language more, learn language more, and teach language better. Syntax is the order, the combination. Again, something that we discussed already, the combination of words into phrases, clauses, structures, sentences, etc. And then you have semantics. It deals with the study of meaning. So we said already several times that meaning in English is arbitrary. But semantics looks at this arbitrary way in which meaning is conveyed. It shows how new words are formed. It shows how the meaning changes from time to time. A word that had one meaning 100 years back today has another meaning. For example, we never had a word sanitize. We had and sanitizer. These words were there, but they were not part of everyday life. So we associated sanity with a condition of the brain, or your psychological state. But now we talk a lot about sanitizing. And curiously, the meaning of sane, health. Sane is basically the meaning of sane is health. That is why it is called sanitary. Sanitary means healthy, and sanitize to make healthy. So we today have the meaning of sterilize or kill the germs, but sanity, sane essentially meant health. Later on, through a peculiar semantic change, I think euphemism was involved when people talk about the mental health. So sanity and sanatorium. Sanatorium was a place where you would go when you are not well. But today, that word has come to have the meaning of a place where a mentally ill person is confined. So all these changes, every word has a story, and that opens a fascinating world if you look for it. So that is semantics. And now we look at some other aspects of linguistics. This chapter gives an overall picture, and then next session onwards, we'll be looking at specifics. Uh, well, general linguistics, as a description of general linguistics here, it supplies the concepts and categories in terms of which particular languages are to be analyzed. There is a descriptive linguistics, which is the basic feature of modern linguistics. We do not prescribe, as I said before at the beginning. We only describe. So we have descriptive linguistics and not prescriptive linguistics. We will talk about descriptive and prescriptive linguistics again later. Now you have two other words here, diachronic and synchronic. These are very interesting words. Diachronic study of language is the study of history of the language. So when I talked about how the Dravidian languages split up into modern South Indian languages, when I talked about the Indo-European family of languages, I was talking about diachronic linguistic study. That was diachronic linguistics, the history of the evolution of language, and that is diachronic. And when I say that Malayalam language has changed over the last 50 years, I'm making a diachronic report of it. If I'm looking at the kind of Malayalam spoken in the 80s, based on evidence in movies and other recordings, I will be making a synchronic study of the language. I'm looking at the language of a particular place at a particular period of time. So it can be today, it can be present, it can be some point of time in the past. Then it would be synchronic. Even if I'm studying the features of a language that as it existed 20 years or 100 years or 200 years back, it would be synchronic if I'm looking at it at a particular point of time. But when I look at its evolution over time, it would be diachronic. I hope you understood that. We'll come to that. All these things will come again. So no worries. So theoretical linguistics is opposed to general linguistics. So general linguistics applies the concepts and categories in terms of which particular languages are to be analyzed. And in theoretical linguistics, we come at theoretical, we look at the theoretical structure and framework. Language with a view to construct a theory of their structure and functions without regard to any practical applications. We need both theoretical linguistics and applied linguistics or general linguistics. But these overlap. See, it's written here that there is little difference made between the theoretical and general linguistics. They're all the same. So you do not have to differentiate. Nobody's going to ask you to define theoretical linguistics or general linguistics. But remember the word descriptive linguistics, remember diachronic linguistics, and remember synchronic linguistics. We will look at them again. And here there is micro and macro linguistics again. Just be familiar with it. Microlinguistics, the sole concern is the structure of language without regard to the acquisitional, cultural, sociological, psychological aspects. So that is microlinguistics. You are focusing entirely on one aspect of the language. When you look at all the aspects, you take a broader view, it is macro linguistics. So for example, if you are studying Malayalam and you study only at the sounds that exist and the pronunciation of different words, etc., it would be micro linguistic study of Malayalam. If I look at this sound and its variant forms in different cultural scenes, in different people who have acquired Malayalam in the presence of another language, for example, in the border with Tamil Nadu, that particular sound may have a slight difference. All these things and the psychological condition of the learner and his physiological features, all things are taken into consideration. It would be macro linguistics. But generally, we are more interested in this macro linguistic aspect. So because we learn language for communication, We learn language to be able to communicate efficiently in that particular language and be successful. Therefore, we are more interested in the macro linguistic aspect. But you also might need to have micro linguistic skills if you want to specialize in this area. And two other words here are comparative linguistics and contrastive linguistics. Just be familiar with all these words. Don't worry if you have forgotten one or two. It's not going to make any difference. Comparative linguistics, again, it's from the very word you will probably understand. It is comparing uh, two or more languages, particularly in a diachronic manner. You're comparing two or more languages in a historic evolutionary kind of way. You are doing comparative linguistics. And if you are contrastivist, you are taking Malayalam and English vowel system and you are putting them side by side and drawing the differences. It is a synchronic comparative study, which is called contrastive linguistics. It's a contrast. You are looking at the contrast also. Even though there is comparison involved, there is more of a contrasting. It is comparison of two or more synchronic descriptions. Comparative linguistics is generally broad kind of comparison between two languages. Again, here one interesting thing is, even if I study English and Malayalam vowel system, it's also a comparative linguistic study. Though on a micro level, there is a contrastive matter involved. So Sir William Jones is mentioned here, a very important philologist. In those days, Sir William Jones, who was in India, was doing explorations, studying Sanskrit. He found many similarities between Sanskrit, Greek, Latin, Celtic, and Germanic languages. So from that came the idea of the Indo-European large family of languages. And that kind of comparison was called comparative philology. So that the word philology used to be the ancient word, or rather the olden word for linguistics. Today we use the word linguistics and not philology. Philo is love and logos is word. Philology would be love of words. So that is how that word came. If you look at synchronic, diachronic, etc., you can find this kind of etymological study. Chronos is time. So synchronic and diachronic. Di is, more. Basically, di means two. Okay, those are interesting things. And now we come to approaches to linguistics. Concept of grammar. That's an interesting thing. Okay. Approaches to linguistics. Broadly, we talk about the traditional grammar and what happens after that. Traditional approach to language study. And it's a rather vague word. What is traditional? Traditional grammar. This is here. When we talk about traditional grammar, we are talking specifically about English language. Malayalam language will have a different history in this aspect. We too had that. As I said, Malayalam language was supposed to. There was an attempt to Sanskritize Malayalam. So many of the Malayalam words we have been Sanskritized, and the original Malayalam word is now hardly visible. Jodi is a Sanskritized version of Chodi, for example. So there was this concept that some languages were more noble, and there were many inferior languages. And these inferior languages have to kind of follow the rules of the noble language. So that was there in India, that was there in Kerala, that was there in England as well. So Latin was considered to be an elite language, a kind of noble language, and English, which was essentially the mother tongue of the 99.99% people living in England in the 17th, 18th century, was considered to be inferior. It's very, very ridiculous to think of that. And there are many, people who talk about um, Shakespeare as an authority of English. In those days, English was not considered respectable. That's a funny thing. Though many writers were writing a lot in English, and that wealth is still there, English did not have much respect at that time. Among the scholars, they considered Latin and Greek to be very elitish languages. So, in traditional grammar, until the early uh, years of 20th century, I would say, or little before that, English, even into the 20th century, maybe 1920, etc., English was studied in the same manner as they would study Latin. Latin was, so in traditional grammar, the emphasis was on the written language. The emphasis was on the written language. So that is why modern linguistics is very different. So far, we have been talking about linguistics. We have been talking about modern linguistics, post 1930s or something like that. So before that, linguistics was again very conservative, very prescriptive in its outlook. So the rules of traditional grammar were Latin based, and scholars like Ben Jonson, who wrote the earliest treatise on grammar, were deeply learned in classical languages like Greek and Latin. So they were kind of apologetic to English, and they tried to make English more structured by giving it a grammar. There were grammar books in Latin and Greek, but there was no grammar book for English. So that was artificially created later by English philologists so that English will also be a respectable language. And we in India very religiously follow these grammar books and get into deep trouble. Um, so, okay. So that is traditional grammar. So points to remember is traditional grammar were largely based on Latin, and Latin is a dead language. Latin rules are fixed because it doesn't change at all. English is a living language. Malayalam is a living language. So it is very difficult to fix the pronunciation or grammar or vocabulary of Malayalam because the vocabulary of today will be redundant. And 10 years from now, people may have different words for some of the words that we use now. Words die and new words come. Grammatical structures die and new structures come. Even pronunciation might change over time. That happens to living languages. But Latin, being a language that is not used for actual communication, just as Sanskrit is not used for actual communication, just as Hebrew is not used for actual communication, just as Syriac is not used anywhere for actual communication, those languages will be fixed. They will have fixed rules, fixed. They will not change in any manner. Particularly in the texts that we have, which are scholarly texts, the language will be a kind of standard thing. And when we apply the rules of these to a living language like English, we get into trouble. And we do not benefit from that. That is what is happening. So they were focusing on these dead languages, the rules and structures of these Latin and Greek, etc. And again, they were also looking at the written language. So they gave a lot of emphasis on grammar, on the written aspect, and they stressed on rote learning, and they did not accept any language variety. And here, there's another important point that Dr. Murali has put into the material. Traditional grammar overlooked the distinction between the notion of form, function, and meaning. What are form, function, and meaning? Form is the shape or the morphological aspect of a word. The formal thing. It can be syntactic also. Rama had his supper. The appearance of these words, Rama had his supper, the appearance of these words is the formal aspect or what we call grammar of it. But the function it performs might be different. I'll give you another example. I'm saying that, so suppose imagine, unfortunately, we are all sitting in different parts of the district or maybe even beyond that. Suppose we were all in the same room and I am saying how hot it is. So many of you would remain the same. They would you would sympathize with me. Oh, he is feeling very hot. What can we do? But a couple of you might think, wonder if what I said might have another meaning. The form of my utterance is how hot it is. It is an exclamatory sentence. That is the formal feature of that sentence. But I might imply that it's very hot and I want to go out. I want to stop the class. Maybe that is the significance I have. That is a function of this sentence, something that Chomsky would later call the deep structure of that sentence. I could also mean that it may be a request asking you to switch on the fan. So some of you might understand that and would volunteer to switch on the fan. My statement was how hot it is. The impact is someone understands that sir wants to leave the room. Some people understand that he wants the fan to be turned on. And again, in another context, the same sentence, how hot it is, exclamatory sentence, could have the meaning of, can you open the windows so that more air will come in? So that's the difference between form and function. A statement that I make could have a formal feature, which is a surface structure. Deep within it could serve many functions. So the same formal feature could have many functions. So the functions could be different. That is the form and function. So today we talk about functional grammar. And people who write the functional grammar text also do not have a clarity about what function they are serving. That is why these functional grammar books do not seem to be very helpful to us. And then we have meaning, the essential meaning ultimately that is conveyed, or whether, if at all, essential meaning exists, whatever. So form, function, and meaning are important. In traditional times, meaning was given a lot of importance. So they studied meaning very with a lot of care. But today we don't give much importance to meaning. We are bothered about the function, and the meaning is conveyed differently. We have not much control over it. Yeah, so the traditional grammar did not bother much about the distinction between form, function, and meaning. Therefore, their definition of word classes, parts of speech in traditional grammar, is unsatisfactory. So even today, now we learn this parts of speech, which are we learn it religiously. And if you do not know whether a word is a noun or not, you are classified as an ignoramus. So if you are not able to identify an adjective, then you would be considered having zero knowledge in English. But actually, you might be very proficient in the language and you may be communicating very well, but you're not able to perform this function. That is the modern, even today, we have that way of judging people. We talk about the parts of speech, which is basically nonsense because your conscious awareness of parts of speech doesn't help you in any way in communicating. That's a different story. But this is the traditional grammar thing, that is the parts of speech idea. These classifications are based on a single criterion. For example, noun is defined as the name of a thing, person, or place. But what about love? Love is not a thing. Love is not a place. Love is not a person. The word distinction, it is not a person. Equality is not a place. Equality is not a thing. Still, they are nouns. So, by that definition, you do not attain a full understanding. So that can be said about verb also. See, a verb is said to be word denoting action. What about destruction? Destroy is a verb, but destruction is a noun. How do you explain all these things? So I am saying that this knowledge is useful. For example, now my meta-linguistic knowledge came out when I said destroy is a verb and destruction is a noun. But actually, this knowledge, the awareness of this should come after you master the language. That is not a way to master the language. Today, the problem with grammar today is that we structure all these rules and we teach the rules, believing that learning the rules will make you better communicators in the language. That won't happen. Knowledge of these rules should be unconscious. That is what we are going to say very soon, with which we hope to conclude today's discussions. Yeah, so the same about noun and verb and all those, you can read this in detail later. In olden days, in traditional grammar, the discipline of linguistics was looked upon as being subordinate to logic and philosophy. Logic and philosophy were considered higher sciences, and linguistics, or philology as it was called, was considered to be subservient to these. A break, so this paragraph is important, which I'm going to look at. A break to this sequence a break to all these notions about language. That language is primarily written, language should be structured, or English should be structured in the following the rules of Latin. That that English words can be classified in the same manner as we classify Latin words, etc. A total break came through the early work of Leonard Bloomfield and Ferdinand de Saussure. Ferdinand de Saussure and Leonard Bloomfield, two early names, and Zelig Harris is another person. We'll learn more about them soon. So I'll read. A break to the sequence came with the advent of eminent anthropologists and linguists like Leonard Bloomfield and Ferdinand de Saussure. Linguistics during this period aimed at describing each language in its own terms and merits. See, look at this. The spoken form of the language was given substantial importance. This is modern linguistics. The spoken form, dialects and registers became significant. Dialects and registers are different varieties. We will be talking about them more later. Linguists began to generalize about which sounds were common in languages of the world, and etc. And here you have Zelig Harris in his book Methods of Structural Linguistics proposed an analysis of language. The use of meaning in the description of various grammar categories were rejected. Saussure in Course de Linguistique Générale, or a course in general linguistics, discussed such concepts as synchrony and diachrony, langue and parole, etc. All these things we will be looking at in detail later. Langue and parole, diachrony and synchrony. And then Noam Chomsky came with his cognitive approach, which is psychological approach, and revolutionized the knowledge of language. You remember, Chomsky is still alive, so it is pretty recent. The big changes in linguistic study in Europe happened relatively recently, maybe after the Second World War. In the second half of 20th century, in the 60s, 70s, you had major insights into how language worked. So modern, very often the problem with us is that we still follow the pre-colonial days when the methods of teaching English that the British people followed some 80 years back. They changed long back, but we still cling on to those things. That is one problem we have, which hinders our acquisition of English language. But that's a different topic. We'll be doing that more in the fourth semester when we study the teaching of English. So here, these things, structuralists like Bloomfield and Saussure and Zelig Harris, they made a major contribution to the transition from traditionalism to modern approaches to linguistic study. But Chomsky was the person who made the biggest difference when he came up with his notions about cognitive psychology. And he disproved many things that the structuralists like Harris said, and he added to them, made them rich. But that doesn't make any of these, even the traditional approach, the approach of the structuralist, approach of Chomsky, none of these things are totally good or bad. We are interested in this as objective, impartial scholars, and we will make use of all this knowledge, accept what is acceptable, which has been tested by time, and reject those things which did not stand the test of time. I think we will conclude very quickly with a few more very important points, just points. One is explicit and tacit knowledge, which is something we already hinted at. Linguistic knowledge is not often explicit. So that is, you are a good user of Malayalam. So when I speak Malayalam in a wrong way, you will immediately be able to say you are wrong, and this is the way it should be said. So suppose I make a wrong sentence in Malayalam, which has an absurd meaning, and you, being a good user of Malayalam, will tell me that is not the way it should be said. This is the way it should be said. That is good. You have that tacit knowledge, deep knowledge in your brain. You know exactly how it should be said. That is enough. You need not be able to explain what went wrong. I am not interested in what went wrong. When I make a wrong statement, you correct me. I am only bothered about correcting myself and seeing that next time I use the right sentence so I get the right impact. I am not worried about the exactly what happened. That is how it generally works in language. You make a wrong statement, you hear somebody saying the right statement and having the acquired effect, the desired effect, and you change accordingly. That is how you make mistakes and then you correct. You don't always need the detailed linguistics. So in English, unfortunately, when you make a mistake, you expect somebody to tell you what exactly went wrong. Like saying that, see, you should have used the present perfect structure there. You have forgotten to use the infinitive there. That is the passive form. This kind of meta-linguistic knowledge is expected, which is what has led us in the wrong path for long. Your knowledge is tacit, it is unconscious, it is implicit, it is hidden in your brain. You need not know exactly what happened. Who should know that? A linguist should know that. A specialist in the area should know what went wrong because that is his area. A normal human being, two normal human beings trying to communicate in English need not have that meta linguistic knowledge to explain what went wrong. That kind of a knowledge is not expected from you. When we try to learn Hindi, we wouldn't do that. When we try to learn Tamil, we wouldn't do that. But when trying to learn English, we still do that because the traditional grammar still hangs around in our environment a lot. That is why we are worried about it much. So explicit knowledge and tacit knowledge. Explicit is when you are able to explicitly tell others how language works. That is a useful information, but you don't need that. An ordinary speaker doesn't need that. For example, suppose I am a mechanic. I work with cars and machines, and I work in Canada. And what do I need? I don't need to have the ability to say why a sentence is right and wrong. My only need is to say the right thing so that my customers are happy. So after I make a mistake, I see a frown on the customer's face. I'm alert, and next time I hear somebody else speak the same context, I pick up, I correct, and I work like that. I don't need a teacher to tell me, here you have used the wrong tense. That kind of word is not needed for me. But who needs explicit knowledge of grammar? A grammarian, an English language teacher needs that. An English language student also needs that, but not a botany student or a commerce student. Everybody needs to speak English correctly without mistakes, but the knowledge of how language works and the ability to talk about language is a totally different thing. That is explicit and tacit knowledge of thing. And then the difference between utterance and sentences. Sentences are the written kind of correct thing that you talk about. And utterances are actual things that happen in life. You make many utterances, and all these utterances need not be logical sentences. And for example, here, officers is busy with work is an utterance. So when you correct it, it becomes officers are busy. Basically, utterances and sentences are the same, but here a difference is drawn so that we'll understand it better. So all the sentences that we make in our speech can be said to be utterances, and all need not be acceptable or grammatical. And this takes us to linguistic competence and linguistic performance. Our knowledge of the language is our competence, which may be much more than our ability to perform. So I would say everybody who are attending this program and most of the educated people in Kerala have a reasonably high linguistic competence in English. But on performance level, you have problem. Actually, that is a minor problem. If you have the right approach, you can easily rectify that and become good performers in English. But many notions prevent us from attaining that, but we will look at them later. So Chomsky was a person who drew the distinction between linguistic competence and linguistic performance. So the theory of linguistic competence is what we call grammar of the language. So that The competence is the underlying rules. Again, the implicit silent kind of thing. And performance is the real avishkar of that knowledge. A theory of performance describes the psychological processes involved in using one linguistic competence. Once is not one linguistic, one's linguistic competence. Yeah. So that is all. I think we'll conclude for today. There is a lot of thunder going on. So this is basically an introduction. And the next day we will be looking at structuralist people, and then we look at Chomsky, etc., in detail. And if you have any questions, there is thunder going on, and I think you also are experiencing it, which might blow up your machines. So we'll conclude now. If you have any questions, you can type in the chat box. And participants have reduced by 100. Okay, we will not venture more. We'll conclude now, and I wish you all a good weekend, and we will meet again on Monday. Okay, I'm closing the event.